In the endless sky, a fearless woman vanished without a trace. No wreckage. No clues. Just whispers carried by the wind. Tonight, on Graveyard of Secrets, we uncover the mysterious last flight of Amelia Earhart, and the chilling questions that still haunt the world. On the morning of July 2, 1937, the Pacific Ocean shimmered like an endless sheet of glass as Amelia Earhart prepared for one of the final legs of her attempt to circumnavigate the globe. Alongside her navigator Fred Noonan, she departed from New Guinea, bound for the tiny speck of land called Howland Island, a dot in the Pacific barely big enough to fit an airstrip. Their aircraft, a sleek Lockheed Electra 10E, roared into the clouds carrying not just fuel and charts, but the weight of history. Amelia was on the verge of becoming the first woman to fly around the world. Radio operators expected regular check-ins, but as the Electra soared over thousands of miles of open water, signals began to falter. Static drowned her voice. Coordinates grew uncertain. At one point she said, "We are on the line, running north and south," and then nothing. Silence. Search planes and ships scoured the seas. The U.S. Navy launched the largest rescue mission in history, combing 250,000 square miles of ocean. Not a single trace of the Electra or its crew was ever found. Some swore they picked up faint distress calls on amateur radios, others whispered of wreckage washed up on distant atolls. Rumors blossomed like storm clouds. Did she crash into the sea, swallowed by the deep? Was she captured by the Japanese while flying near forbidden territory? Or did she survive on a remote island, her last days spent looking at the empty horizon? Decades later, fragments of evidence, bits of metal, bones on an island called Nikumaroro, reignited debate. But none could confirm the truth. Amelia Earhart remains both a legend and a mystery, her final flight suspended in time like her silver Electra over the endless Pacific. The early morning sky above New Guinea, was painted with hues of pale gold and violet as Amelia Earhart prepared for what would become the most mysterious flight in aviation history. The airstrip buzzed with mechanics, navigators, and curious onlookers, but in the center of it all stood Amelia herself, calm, collected, and exuding an almost magnetic confidence. She had done this 100 times before. Yet, there was an intensity in her eyes that morning, as though she sensed the gravity of the moment. Amelia was no ordinary pilot. She was already a global icon, a woman who had carved her name into the clouds at a time when aviation itself was still young and dangerous. The world knew her as the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic, a fearless adventurer who had challenged not only physical boundaries but social ones as well. In 1937, she was more than a pilot, she was a living symbol of progress, daring, and hope. As the sleek silver Lockheed Electra 10E gleamed under the sun, her dream of circling the globe was nearly complete. Amelia had already conquered much of the Earth's skies, touching down in far-flung corners of South America, Africa, and Asia. Only the vast Pacific Ocean lay between her and immortality. For Amelia, this wasn't just about aviation records, it was about proving that limits existed only to be broken. On that runway, every detail mattered. The Electra had been checked and rechecked, its twin engines humming with restrained power. Fred Noonan, her trusted navigator, reviewed charts and coordinates meticulously. Their destination was a pinpoint in the ocean, Howland Island, so small it looked like a crumb on a map. But Amelia was unfazed. She had faced danger before, storms and crosswinds that would terrify lesser pilots. Still, there was a quiet undercurrent of tension. The vastness of the Pacific was unlike any other leg of their journey. Thousands of miles of featureless water stretched out in every direction, with only a narrow strip of land to aim for. Even with the best navigation tools of the day, finding that speck was like threading a needle in a hurricane. But Amelia's voice, when she spoke to reporters that morning, betrayed no fear. "We'll make it," she said, her trademark smile concealing the risks. People admired her not just for her flying skills, but for her unshakable spirit. She embodied the belief that humanity could rise above its fears. Young girls around the world looked to her as proof that dreams were not confined by gender or tradition. Her husband, publisher George Putnam, often said that Amelia carried two things in every flight, her compass and her courage. As the plane rolled onto the runway, bystanders waved, cheering her on. The engines roared louder, echoing across the field, drowning out the doubts whispered by navigators who knew how dangerous this leg would be. In that moment, Amelia wasn't just chasing personal glory, she was carrying the aspirations of an entire generation, proving that the sky was not the limit, but only the beginning. The Electra accelerated, its nose lifting from the earth, wheels leaving the tarmac. The crowd watched as the silver bird climbed into the dawn, shrinking into the horizon until it was just a glint, then gone. None of them could have known that they were watching history's last glimpse of Amelia Earhart alive. High above the ocean, the world beneath seemed peaceful, endless, and deceptively calm. Amelia, with her leather jacket and steady hands, gripped the controls, focused and fearless. The morning sun bathed the cockpit, and the Pacific lay ahead like an endless highway, daring her to find its hidden road. Far away, radios crackled in preparation for her hourly check-ins. Ships waited to guide her in, searchlights ready if night fell. But no one, not even Amelia herself, could predict that within hours, her voice would vanish into static, and the Pacific would claim its greatest mystery. Before Amelia Earhart became a legend whispered over the roar of engines and the hush of ocean waves, she was simply a young woman who refused to stay on the ground. In an age when women were expected to keep their feet firmly planted in domestic life, Amelia chose instead to soar above the world, carving her path through clouds and prejudice alike. Her fascination with flight ignited the first time she saw an airplane at a county fair. It was little more than a fragile machine of wood and fabric, but to Amelia, it was freedom with wings. Years later, she took her first flying lesson in a bright yellow biplane, and from that moment, the sky was no longer distant. She saved every dollar she could, taking odd jobs, working as a nurse and a social worker, to pay for lessons. Her determination was as steady as the hum of an engine. By the late 1920s, she was already making history. In 1928, Amelia became the first woman to cross the Atlantic by air, though as a passenger. To the world, this was groundbreaking. To Amelia, it was only the beginning. "I was just baggage," she would later say, her voice steady but unsatisfied. She wasn't content to be carried through the clouds, she wanted to command the cockpit herself. That resolve paid off in 1932 when she piloted her own plane from Newfoundland to Ireland, solo, non-stop, and unassisted. For 15 hours she battled icy winds, mechanical issues, and exhaustion. When she landed in a muddy Irish field, she didn't just make history, she became a symbol of courage worldwide. Honors poured in, including the Distinguished Flying Cross, the first ever awarded to a woman. But Amelia didn't rest on that glory. Over the next few years, she shattered altitude records, speed records, and long-distance flight records. She flew from Hawaii to California, from Los Angeles to Mexico City, then on to Newark, setting new benchmarks for endurance and precision. Each flight was a calculated risk, and every success expanded the possibilities of aviation itself. More than just an aviator, Amelia was a fierce advocate for women. She spoke tirelessly at universities, wrote books, and mentored female pilots. Through her work with the 99s, an international organization of women aviators she helped establish, she encouraged others to chase dreams that seemed impossible. Her message was simple yet revolutionary: courage is contagious. Amelia also understood the power of image. With her short-cropped hair, leather jacket, and ever-present smile, she became not only an icon of flight but of independence. The world admired her not just for crossing oceans, but for defying expectations with elegance and grit. Every headline that bore her name carried with it a sense of hope and adventure. By the time she began planning her round-the-world flight in 1937, Amelia wasn't just a pilot, she was an emblem of human potential. The trip would span nearly 29,000 miles, skimming over deserts, jungles, and oceans. It would test not only her skills but the limits of contemporary navigation and communication. Yet she approached it as she had every other challenge, methodically, bravely, and without complaint. Fred Noonan, her navigator, respected her for more than her fame. He admired her ability to stay calm under pressure, to solve problems midair with a steady hand and clear mind. Together, they charted a path that would encircle the globe, a flight so ambitious it captured headlines on every continent. As departure day drew near, Amelia reflected on her life's work. She wasn't chasing fame, she already had that. She was chasing the horizon itself, the unbroken line where sky met earth and dreams touched reality. Every record she had broken, every storm she had conquered, had prepared her for this moment, to prove that no place on earth was unreachable, no dream too distant to pursue. July 2, 1937. The morning air in New Guinea, was heavy with moisture, the sky still dim as the sun pushed through a veil of clouds. Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan made their way across the tarmac toward their Lockheed Electra 10E, the polished aluminum body glinting like a blade in the early light. This was no ordinary flight. It was the second-to-last leg of their journey around the globe, a stretch of nearly 2,600 miles over the open Pacific, bound for a pinpoint of land called Howland Island. The Electra had been fueled to capacity, its tanks brimming with more than 1,000 gallons of gasoline. Mechanics and ground crews double-checked every gauge, every bolt, every wire. The aircraft's engines purred like twin predators ready to spring, but even at full power, the journey ahead would push the plane to its limits. If everything went right, they would arrive at Howland Island after about 18 hours in the air. If anything went wrong, there was nowhere to land, just an ocean wider than imagination. Fred Noonan unfolded his maps one last time in the cramped cabin. His job was navigation, a task that required precision bordering on perfection. The island was barely 2 miles long, a speck in an endless sea. Even a small miscalculation could mean missing it entirely, leaving no hope for recovery. He reviewed the planned route again, tracing it with a finger, checking celestial navigation charts, and syncing his watch. Amelia, ever composed, slid into the pilot's seat and adjusted her controls. She was wearing her signature leather jacket and silk scarf, though inside the cockpit it would soon grow stifling hot. She had been briefed by the U.S. Coast Guard. The cutter Itasca would be stationed off Howland Island, monitoring radio transmissions and ready to guide her in. She trusted their plan, though she knew the Pacific had a way of humbling even the boldest. As dawn broke fully, the Electra roared down the runway and lifted gracefully into the sky. The mountains of New Guinea slipped behind them, replaced by a carpet of glittering blue water. At first, the flight went smoothly. Amelia's voice crackled over the radio at scheduled intervals, calm, clear, professional. She reported weather conditions and fuel status as the Electra sailed over the vast expanse below. But as the hours passed, the weather began to shift. Pockets of cloud drifted across their path, reducing visibility. The static on the radio deepened, swallowing fragments of Amelia's words. Fred worked tirelessly, taking sun sightings with his sextant, correcting headings, recalculating positions. The line between confidence and concern grew thinner with each passing mile. Back aboard the Itasca, radio men strained to hear her transmissions. "CAC to Itasca, we must be on you but cannot see you, gas is running low." The messages were clipped, faint, distorted by atmospheric interference. The Coast Guard sent repeated signals back, but Amelia never confirmed receipt. It was as if her voice was coming from a ghost, somewhere in the endless blue. Inside the Electra, tension rose. The Pacific, calm and deceptively endless, stretched beneath them with no sign of land. Noonan scanned the horizon, desperate for the shadow of an island, the glint of a waiting ship. The sun climbed higher, burning through the cockpit glass, and every tick of the clock devoured precious fuel. Amelia's last intelligible message came just after 8:43 a.m. "We are on the line 157-337, running north and south," and then, nothing. The radio went silent. The Itasca kept calling, scanning the skies with binoculars, but the silver Electra never appeared. Somewhere between and Howland, somewhere over 2,000 miles of unforgiving water, Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan vanished. In that silence, in that thin line between the known and the unknown, a legend was born. The Pacific became their shroud, and the world would never stop asking what happened in those final, fateful minutes of flight. The first signs of trouble were subtle, just a whisper of static on the radio, a few words clipped short by interference. At first, no one panicked. Long-range flights in 1937 were never perfectly clear, and Amelia Earhart's voice had faded in and out before. But as the hours passed, the interruptions grew longer, the messages more fragmented, and a feeling of unease began to creep over the radio men aboard the Coast Guard cutter Itasca. Amelia's early transmissions were steady and precise, but by dawn over the Pacific they had become faint, as if swallowed by the vast sky. She reported that she was flying on schedule, but static chewed through every syllable. Radio men strained to catch fragments, altitude estimates, weather observations, compass bearings, yet none of it painted a clear picture of her location. Fred Noonan, hunched over charts in the cramped cabin of the Electra, fought to refine their course. Celestial navigation was an art as much as a science, and with shifting cloud cover obscuring the horizon, every calculation carried uncertainty. The Pacific was an endless mirror, there was no shoreline to correct a heading against, no landmarks to confirm they were on track. Amelia needed the Itasca's radio signals to guide her, and yet, somehow, she wasn't hearing them. On board the Itasca, tension thickened like a gathering storm. Radio men sent out steady streams of Morse code, then voice transmissions, desperately trying to reach her. They changed frequencies, boosted power, tried every method they knew. But there was no acknowledgement. To them, it was as if Amelia were flying blind, calling into a void. Her voice finally cut through again. "We must be on you, but cannot see you, gas is running low." The words sent a chill through every man aboard the cutter. If Amelia believed she was over Howland Island and still couldn't see it, something had gone terribly wrong. The Itasca fired up its boilers, preparing to make smoke signals to guide her, but no aircraft appeared on the horizon. Minutes stretched into hours. Each faint transmission carried a sharper edge of desperation. "We are on the line." 157 to 337, Amelia's voice was still calm, but beneath it lay an urgency that even the static couldn't hide. The line she mentioned, a navigation reference, suggested she was flying up and down a specific course, searching, scanning, burning fuel she could not spare. In the radio room, sweat beaded on foreheads. They knew her fuel supply had limits. They knew how quickly a fully loaded Electra could become an empty shell falling through the sky. They sent signal after signal, hoping to catch her attention, hoping to drag her towards safety. But silence answered them every time. Speculation erupted on deck. Was her receiver broken? Was her transmitter weak? Was she too low to catch their signals? Theories piled up as the horizon remained stubbornly empty. The Pacific, normally peaceful, felt menacing now, a featureless void where even a bright silver aircraft could vanish without a trace. By mid-morning, frantic efforts replaced routine. The Itasca steamed in widening circles, engines pounding, scanning for any glimpse of the Electra. The cutter's radio operators logged each message, noting the time, the faintness, the direction of sound, but none of it brought Amelia any closer. Every unanswered call deepened the sense of dread. And then, without warning, the radio went dead. No more voice. No more static. No hint of life in the airwaves. The cutter's radio men sat staring at their equipment, ears pressed to headphones, as the silence stretched on. Somewhere out there, Amelia Earhart was flying on faith alone, searching for an island that refused to appear, while the world waited on a sound that would never come. When Amelia Earhart's radio went silent on the morning of July 2, 1937, the U.S. Coast Guard and Navy moved with an urgency rarely seen outside of wartime. The Itasca, already stationed near Howland Island, began sweeping the surrounding waters, belching smoke into the sky in case Amelia was close enough to see. But there was no sign of her silver Lockheed Electra, not a glint in the clouds, not a shadow on the horizon. Within hours, word of her disappearance crackled across telegraph wires to Washington, D.C. The Navy dispatched some of its most advanced ships, including the battleship Colorado and the carrier Lexington, to join the hunt. Search planes were readied, maps were unfurled, and orders were clear: find Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan before the Pacific swallowed them forever. The search covered an area that seemed almost unimaginable, over 250,000 square miles of open ocean, an expanse as empty and unforgiving as space itself. Navy pilots scanned the sea from cockpits high above, their eyes straining against the sun's glare. They circled remote atolls and reefs, hoping to spot an oil slick, a floating wing, a desperate signal written in sand. But each new sweep brought only blue water meeting blue sky. Messages from radio amateurs complicated matters. Around the world, people claimed to hear faint distress calls on shortwave sets, a woman's voice breaking through the static, pleading for help. Were these genuine transmissions from a downed Electra? Or just wishful thinking, magnified by the legend already forming around Amelia? The Navy had to consider every possibility, chasing rumors as earnestly as they searched coordinates. The Lexington deployed its fleet of planes in relentless patterns. Crews flew grid after grid over endless waves, fueled by little more than determination and the distant hope of a miracle. The Colorado sailed close to the Phoenix Islands, scanning beaches and lagoons through binoculars, sending landing parties ashore to investigate footprints or fragments. Every island was a question mark. Every reef was a possible refuge or a watery grave. Meanwhile, officials at home wrestled with the sheer cost of the operation. This was the most expensive and ambitious search effort in peacetime history. But no one wanted to abandon hope. Amelia Earhart wasn't just any pilot, she was a global icon. Her courage had inspired millions, and the idea that she could simply vanish without a trace was unthinkable. Days turned into weeks, and the atmosphere grew heavier. Every hour without a discovery felt like a door closing. Planes reported seeing shadows in the water, only to circle back and find nothing. Ships reported flashes of light at night, which dissolved into moonlit reflections on the waves. The ocean seemed to mock the searchers, hiding its secrets beneath miles of blue silence. Even as the official operation pressed forward, whispers of darker theories began to circulate. Some believed Amelia had been forced down by enemy forces. Others thought she might have landed safely on an uninhabited island, only to perish before rescuers arrived. These ideas fueled public fascination but also stretched the search thin, sending resources to far-flung places on little more than rumor. By mid-July, the Navy's fleet had logged hundreds of flight hours and swept vast areas without success. The Electra remained invisible, as if the ocean itself had erased every trace. On deck, sailors leaned over railings, scanning for wreckage. In the air, pilots banked low over empty reefs, hoping to spot a signal from the castaways they believed must be out there. The massive search effort was unlike anything the Pacific had ever seen: ships, planes, and men united by one singular purpose, to solve the vanishing of Amelia Earhart. But with each passing day, hope thinned like the morning mist over the water, and the realization began to set in: even the largest armada on Earth might not be enough to find a single missing plane. When the massive Navy search failed to find Amelia Earhart or her Electra, the world was stunned, and silence quickly gave birth to speculation. Newspapers splashed bold headlines across their front pages, demanding answers. How could one of the most famous women in the world vanish without leaving even a single fragment of wreckage? It seemed impossible. And yet, the Pacific remained mute. The most immediate explanation was the simplest, that the Electra had run out of fuel and crashed into the ocean, sinking almost instantly beneath thousands of feet of water. This theory matched the last radio messages: Amelia, sounding calm but urgent, reporting she could not locate Howland Island. But if that was the case, why hadn't a single piece of debris washed ashore? Why no oil slick, no floating gear, nothing at all? Others argued Amelia and Fred Noonan may have flown off course and landed on a remote coral atoll in the Phoenix Islands. Nikumaroro, an isolated, uninhabited spit of land, became the center of this idea. Years later, bones, aircraft fragments, and strange signals seemed to support the possibility. Could Amelia have survived for days or even weeks, waiting for rescue that never came? Theories quickly spread beyond navigation errors. Some suggested a darker scenario, that Amelia had strayed near Japanese-controlled territory and was captured. These stories claimed she was taken prisoner as a suspected spy, held on the island of Saipan or even executed. Witnesses decades later swore they had seen a tall American woman under guard, feeding the legend of the Japanese capture theory. Another speculation painted Amelia not as a victim, but as a secret agent. Could her around-the-world flight have been a cover for U.S. military reconnaissance? This theory, whispered during the tense years before World War II, suggested the Electra's disappearance might have been intentional, part of a mission cloaked in government secrecy. But no evidence ever surfaced to prove it. There were even those who believed Amelia survived and returned to America under a new identity. One woman in New Jersey, named Irene Bolam, was famously accused in the 1960s of being Amelia living in disguise. She denied it fiercely, but the idea captured public imagination. If Amelia had lived, why would she hide? Why abandon her fame, her family, her life's work? Shortwave radio operators also added fuel to the mystery. Dozens claimed they had heard distress calls in the days after July 2, 1937, faint voices, a woman's tone, fragmented messages like, "Water high, unable to hold out." If these transmissions were real, they suggested Amelia had landed somewhere intact and alive. Yet no official search found her. Were these calls authentic, or just coincidence magnified by hope? As decades passed, expeditions scoured the Pacific. Divers explored the ocean floor near Howland Island. Archaeologists combed Nikumaroro, recovering artifacts that some claimed belonged to Amelia, a fragment of aluminum, a broken cosmetic jar, remnants of a woman's shoe. None of it was definitive. The Pacific guarded its secrets well. Historians debated over every scrap of evidence, every rumor, every conflicting account. Admirers of Amelia preferred to believe she died bravely at sea, while others clung to the image of her surviving on a lonely island, scanning the horizon for a rescue that never arrived. Each theory fed the mystery rather than solved it. And so Amelia Earhart became more than a pilot who disappeared. She became a riddle, one whose possible answers stretched from the ocean floor to the shadowy corners of pre-war espionage, from forgotten reefs to the heart of conspiracy. With no wreckage, no definitive proof, her final fate remains suspended between myth and history, waiting to be discovered, or forever hidden. For decades after Amelia Earhart vanished, scraps of information emerged like faint echoes, pieces of metal, fragments of stories, whispers of signals, each one igniting hope, only to leave the mystery deeper than before. Every claimed discovery brought excitement, but also bitter debate, because none of it ever seemed to settle the question of what truly happened. One of the earliest claims came from amateur radio operators who insisted they had heard Amelia's voice in the days following her disappearance. They reported words broken by static, "Water high, unable to hold out, we can't stay long," but skeptics argued these were nothing more than random signals mistaken for distress calls. If they were real, it meant Amelia and Fred Noonan had landed safely somewhere, waiting for help that never arrived. But no one could prove it. In 1940, British colonial officers discovered human bones on Nikumaroro, a desolate atoll in the Phoenix Islands. Alongside them were a sextant box and pieces of a woman's shoe. The bones were shipped to Fiji for analysis, but soon after, they were lost. Early examinations claimed the remains belonged to a man, yet decades later, modern researchers reviewing the records suggested they may have been consistent with a tall female, possibly Amelia herself. The debate raged on, with no physical remains left to test. Other tantalizing clues surfaced in later expeditions. A small fragment of aluminum, believed to be from an aircraft, was found on Nikumaroro in 1991. Its dimensions and rivet patterns were studied obsessively, with some experts insisting it matched Earhart's Lockheed Electra. Others dismissed it as unrelated, pointing out that World War II aircraft debris littered the Pacific. Personal items also stirred controversy. A broken cosmetic jar from the 1930s, a fragment of a zipper, and bits of glass bottles were recovered from the island. Could they have belonged to Amelia? Researchers claimed they matched products Earhart was known to use, while skeptics countered that such items were common and could have come from any visitor or shipwreck survivor. Theories outside Nikumaroro produced their own evidence. In Saipan, witnesses swore they had seen an American woman under Japanese guard during the late 1930s. A rusted engine part was even paraded as belonging to Earhart's plane, though experts later refuted the claim. The so-called Japanese capture theory persisted in popular imagination, but hard proof never surfaced. In 2017, a newly uncovered photograph from U.S. National Archives briefly shook the world. It appeared to show Amelia and Fred Noonan alive on a dock in the Marshall Islands after their disappearance. News outlets broadcast it as a breakthrough, until researchers discovered the photo had been published years before Amelia vanished. What looked like certainty dissolved into embarrassment, a reminder of how easily hope can cloud judgment. Even sonar and deep-sea searches became sources of dispute. High-tech expeditions scoured the ocean floor around Howland Island, claiming to detect shapes resembling wreckage. But when examined closer, these anomalies turned out to be rocks, coral formations, or shadows in the deep. Millions of dollars spent, and still no Electra resting on the seabed. Every artifact, every lead, every whisper of a discovery seemed to split the community in two, believers and doubters. Some argued that the cumulative evidence pointed clearly to a crash landing on Nikomaroro. Others insisted Amelia must have gone down at sea, leaving no trace. And a few clung to the idea of capture or escape, convinced the truth was still buried in classified files or uncharted waters. Rather than solving the mystery, each piece of evidence only added new layers of controversy. Amelia Earhart's disappearance was no longer just a question of, where did she go? It became a battlefield of clashing theories, disputed facts, and unending investigation, a puzzle with pieces that never quite fit together. Amelia Earhart's story is not just about engines, maps, and radio signals. It's also about the unshakable courage of two human beings, Amelia herself and her navigator, Fred Noonan, who dared to face the unknown together. They weren't just chasing records, they were pushing the limits of human endurance, knowing every mile carried greater risk than the last. Amelia was no stranger to danger. She had already crossed the Atlantic solo, battled storms, and faced mechanical failures midair. Her confidence came not from arrogance, but from preparation and grit. Every time she climbed into that Lockheed Electra, she knew the sky was unforgiving. But she believed fear was something to be acknowledged, not avoided, and she flew anyway. Fred Noonan, her navigator, was equally fearless. A seasoned pilot and expert in celestial navigation, he had guided Pan Am clippers across vast oceans long before GPS existed. Noonan understood better than anyone how fragile their margin for error was. Yet he accepted the risks without hesitation, committed to finishing the mission alongside Amelia, no matter what obstacles appeared. In the cramped cockpit of the Electra, thousands of feet above the Pacific, they worked as a team bound by trust. Every calculation, every radio call, every decision to alter course depended on mutual faith in each other's skill. Neither doubted the other's resolve. In those final hours, as fuel ran low and uncertainty loomed, there is little doubt they remained calm, professional, and determined. What makes their courage so striking is that they had no safety net. In 1937, there were no satellite phones, no emergency beacons, no rescue aircraft on standby. If something went wrong over the open ocean, help was days, even weeks, away. They faced this reality with eyes open, refusing to let fear dictate their choices. Loyalty also marked their journey. Amelia had many offers to fly solo for greater fame, but she wanted Fred beside her. She knew a mission of this magnitude needed two sets of eyes, two minds working together. For Noonan, joining the flight was not about personal glory, his name was rarely in headlines, but about supporting a fellow aviator's dream to circle the globe at the equator. As the plane drew closer to Howland Island on July 2, 1937, radio operators described Amelia's voice as steady and composed, even as her fuel dwindled. She wasn't panicking. If she and Noonan realized they might not make landfall, they likely focused on landing safely wherever possible, rather than despairing. That kind of calm under pressure is rare, and it speaks to the strength of their characters. Even after their disappearance, the world remembered not just what they did, but how they did it. Amelia was hailed as brave, not reckless, ambitious, not selfish. Her willingness to risk everything for the sake of exploration inspired millions, especially young women told that aviation was no place for them. Fred, though less famous, was remembered by peers as steady, loyal, and professional, the kind of man you would want with you on your most dangerous flight. Their courage was not blind optimism. It was a conscious choice to keep moving forward, no matter the cost. They understood the dangers of long-distance navigation over the Pacific better than anyone. Yet they accepted those dangers with dignity, trusting that skill, preparation, and teamwork would see them through. And perhaps that is the most human part of this mystery. Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan were not superhuman adventurers or mythical figures. They were two determined people in a small aircraft, battling fatigue, weather, and uncertainty, refusing to give up on their dream, or on each other. The disappearance of Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan didn't end with the last crackling radio call. In many ways, it was only the beginning of a story that would span generations. Their loss ignited an obsession that has drawn explorers, historians, and everyday dreamers to the far corners of the Pacific for nearly 90 years. Immediately after their plane vanished in 1937, one of the largest search efforts in U.S. history was launched. Battleships and aircraft scoured thousands of square miles of open ocean, but they found nothing conclusive. That failure planted the seed of mystery. If modern technology and military resources couldn't locate them then, where exactly had they gone? Over the decades, new theories sprouted like islands in the ocean. Some believed the Electra crashed and sank in deep water near Howland Island, resting silently on the sea floor. Others suggested they made an emergency landing on a remote atoll, surviving for days or weeks before succumbing to exposure. Each hypothesis sparked new expeditions and new hope that the truth was within reach. In the 1980s and 1990s, organizations like TIRE, the International Group for Historic Aircraft Recovery, mounted expeditions to places like Nikomaroro Island. They uncovered artifacts, bits of metal, fragments of shoes, and even bone fragments, but none provided absolute proof. Each discovery seemed to answer one question while raising two more. The search evolved with technology. High-resolution sonar, deep-sea submersibles, and satellite imaging offered tools Amelia herself could never have imagined. Private explorers spent millions of dollars mapping the ocean floor, scanning for traces of the Lockheed Electra. Every new expedition carried the same question: would this finally be the one to solve aviation's greatest riddle? The fascination isn't just about the plane, it's about the person. Amelia Earhart became more than a missing pilot, she became a symbol. To this day, she represents boldness, curiosity, and refusal to accept limits. Schools teach her story not as a tragedy, but as an invitation to dream big. And yet, the unsolved nature of her fate adds a haunting edge to that inspiration. For those who search, finding the Electra would not just close a chapter in history. It would restore a sense of completeness, giving her story an ending rooted in fact rather than speculation. Researchers argue that solving the mystery would honor Amelia and Fred as real people, not just as legends frozen in time. But each decade passes without definitive proof. The ocean is vast, its depths uncharted and unforgiving. Even with modern tools, the task is like hunting for a single grain of sand in a shifting desert. Yet explorers refuse to stop looking. The pull of Amelia's legacy is too strong, the idea of leaving her story unresolved too unsettling. The ongoing search has also become a mirror for humanity's own persistence. It's about more than finding a missing plane, it's about refusing to give up on understanding our past. Whether it's bones on an island, an engine on the sea floor, or simply the last coordinates of her flight, people believe the truth is still out there, waiting to be uncovered. And so, decade after decade, ships set sail, planes fly over empty stretches of ocean, and researchers sift through old radio logs and faded maps. Each new generation takes up the question as if for the first time: where did Amelia Earhart go, and why can't we let her go until we know? Amelia Earhart's disappearance is more than an aviation mystery, it's a lens through which we see our own hunger to explore. Her flight around the globe wasn't just a personal ambition, it reflected humanity's need to push boundaries, to test how far courage and ingenuity can go before the unknown pushes back. The unanswered questions surrounding her fate only make that impulse burn brighter. Her story reminds us that progress often comes with risk. In 1937, flight itself was still new, experimental, and thrillingly dangerous. Earhart didn't just fly across continents and oceans, she flew across an invisible line separating what was known from what was unimaginable. Every mile she traveled in that Lockheed Electra was a mile carved out of the unknown, at a time when maps still had blank spaces and technology was fragile. We can't help but be drawn to that courage. In a world now covered by satellites and GPS, Earhart's flight feels almost mythic, as though she stepped into a time before the Earth was fully charted. She wasn't content to stay where it was safe. She carried the message that life isn't about comfort zones, it's about daring to step beyond them, even when the outcome is uncertain. Her disappearance also shows how legends are born. A safe landing in California would have earned her applause and headlines. But vanishing without a trace transformed her from an accomplished pilot into an icon of mystery and resilience. In a sense, the world wrote its own ending to her story, one filled with speculation, romance, and the irresistible pull of the unknown. The unanswered nature of her journey forces us to confront how much we value certainty. We live in an age that wants every question answered instantly, yet Amelia's fate resists quick solutions. It reminds us that not all mysteries bow to human curiosity, and not all heroes are meant to be fully explained. Sometimes the power of a story comes from its silence. Earhart's legacy also inspires deeper questions about ambition and purpose. What drives someone to chase the horizon even when the risks are enormous? Is it the thrill of achievement, the desire for recognition, or something purer, an instinct to see what lies beyond the edge of the map? Her life suggests that true explorers are not chasing fame, they're chasing the feeling of discovery itself. Generations after her disappearance, Amelia continues to call people forward. She challenges us to look at our own fears and ask whether they are real barriers or just imagined ones. She never allowed the limitations of her era, whether technological, physical, or societal, to define how high or how far she would go. That mindset remains as vital today as it was in 1937. Her story also highlights how human beings bond over mystery. Historians, pilots, oceanographers, and ordinary dreamers have all joined in the hunt for her final resting place. The search for Earhart has become a shared human project, uniting people across disciplines and generations. In chasing her trail, we are really chasing our own reflection, our stubborn refusal to stop asking why and where. And while her final chapter has not been written, what she left behind is clear. Her courage doesn't just live in history books, it lives in every person who decides to step into the unknown, take a risk, or defy expectations. The world may never know where she landed, but we know where she soared, far beyond the ordinary, into a realm where only the bold dare to go. Even now, as expeditions scour the Pacific and new technologies promise to solve old mysteries, her presence feels alive. She is out there, somewhere beyond the horizon, still flying in the imagination of the world. Her story refuses to fade, because it speaks to something timeless in the human spirit, a longing to go farther, a refusal to settle for what we already know. And so, Amelia Earhart remains more than a missing pilot, she's a mirror held up to every dreamer who's ever dared to chase a horizon. Her plane may have disappeared, but her courage never did. The Pacific kept its secrets, but the world kept her spirit. We may never pinpoint her final coordinates, but maybe that's the point. Some lives aren't meant to be measured in miles or maps, they're measured in the size of the risks they take, and the doors they leave open for the rest of us. Earhart's last flight wasn't a failure. It was a statement that there will always be people willing to go farther than anyone thought possible, even when the ending is uncertain. And that is what keeps her alive in our stories, in our imagination, and in our own will to step into the unknown. So when you feel fear closing in, when the runway seems too short and the storm clouds gather overhead, remember Amelia. She didn't wait for perfect conditions. She took off anyway, and the world has been chasing her ever since. The truth about Amelia Earhart still drifts somewhere between the clouds and the sea, and we're still chasing it. If you crave mysteries that refuse to stay buried, Join us here on Graveyard of Secrets, and don't forget to subscribe, because the next secret is already waiting.